today we're hosting a talk called Economics of Queerness, Organising Across the Decades. I was wondering if we could get into, I guess, like the term, like economics of queerness and what that brings up for each of you. I guess, like, what do you associate with that? And when you first, I first reached out, when I said we're doing a panel on economics of queerness, what came into your mind?
Well, I would say my organising has continued to be very sporadic and hand-to-mouth in the tradition of the Gay Liberation Front. Because when GLF first started, we decided that we were going to be anarchic, we were going to be spontaneous, and we didn't want to imitate either the political parties, the Labour Party, the Tory Party, or the government in the way that we organise. We wanted to be self-funding and self-fueling. One of the first things that we did in order to organise and to become a cohesive, active group was to have what we called were think-ins, where we would sit together and talk equally amongst ourselves and share our feelings about ourselves as individuals, as LGBT people, although that term wasn't used in those days. It was gays and lesbians, and there was a bit of a mention of trans people, but not very much in the early 70s and 80s. Right? One of the first things that we decided was, that we realized was that every single lesbian and gay man and trans person had grown up in an entirely heterosexual environment. And we decided that one of the first things that we should do is live with ourselves, with each other. And so Gay Liberation Front set up, or should I say allowed to be set up, several different communes. There was the Brixton Fairies. They still exist, but they're much more formal now. They now have become a cooperative. They started off squatting various houses in Mayall Road, which is around the corner from where I live now. And also there was the Notting Hill Fairies, who were the most outrageous and campus group. And in fact, the Notting Hill Fairies gave their slogan to the name of the first book, which was written about the Gay Liberation Front. And that book is called No Bath, but Plenty of Bubbles. And that comes from the fact that the Notting Hill Fairies were squatting in a house which had no water. The landlords had deliberately turned off all the water to try and frighten the Gay Liberation Front activists from that building. And so what they would do, they would come to the other communes to have a bath or to collect water for their places. And we phoned them up on one occasion and said, how are you managing there without any running water? And they said, well, we're having a lot of fun. We have no bath, but we're having so much fun that there's plenty of bubbles here, right? So if you want to know about the first start of the Gay Liberation Front, a really detailed history, check out the book, No Bath, but Plenty of Bubbles, by Lisa Power, in which she interviews about 200 people altogether and gets a very accurate account of exactly how the whole movement started. Now, I was in one of the more conventional communes called the Bounds Green Commune, originally, which is in North London. Originally, we were going to be in a place called Queen's Road, which is shouting distance from Bounds Green Station, and we really loved the idea of being in Queen's Road, but the landlords weren't too keen on us because we were very openly gay. So we later moved, a few months later, we moved into Bounds Green Road, and there we lived together. There were 14 of us. The living room was changed into a bedroom, which meant that you had to step over people who were making love to get to your bed and go to sleep at night. We shared about everything, and I'm surprised to say that it actually worked for a best part of 3 years of us living together. We were learning who we were learning who we wanted to be, and determined that we were going to be out and proud.
I think for me, when the invite came and the prompt around economy in the context of queerness came up, the first things that came to mind were mostly around the ways that I have been working over the years. So for context, I'm not London-based, so I'm based in Essex, and as a queer person, there's not really that much. There's not really that much to do over there. So I was coming into London a lot just to find community, to find spaces where I could be with other people who, got it, were like me, were doing this similar kind of, work, or wanting to do similar kind of work around community and how we're, supporting each other. And I also have a child, so it was kind of like a isolated experience living in Essex. So coming in and realizing also then that there weren't actually that many spaces that were accessible to disabled people and to queer parents. Like a lot of spaces that I was finding were really like party spaces and like clubs, and I was like, yeah, this is great, for like a one night thing, but it's not necessarily the most sustainable, and also doesn't really make me feel confident that like my child will also feel like they can come into these kinds of spaces. And so then that kind of prompted like a lot of organizing, but in that organizing, it was also a realization that there wasn't, as queer people, there wasn't that much money in the community, so then having to think about how to organize in a way that meant that people could still come to things, but that also those things were resourced in a way that meant we were having fun, having a good time. And so I remember coming across this term, no one turned away for lack of funds, and being very excited, like, yeah, this makes sense, because then we just subsidize each other, like whoever can afford to, then will pay whatever they want for this, and we can organize that way. And at the time, there were a lot of spaces that were willing to give us their venues just to use for like community events, like community days where people could just come together and be, and that was basically the beginning of my own like thoughts around economy and being in space with other queer people in a way that was more accessible, and that then kind of bled into my other work, because I work also as a stylist at a salon called Open Barbers, where we work with a sliding scale kind of the idea that sliding scale means that people pay however they can afford, and then it means the people who are paying on the high end of the scale are subsidizing people who are paying on the lower end of the scale, and everyone can get their hair cut in a safe environment that is specifically for, specifically safer for queer and trans people, but welcomes everyone. And that then led into my work as a doula. So I'm also a birth and death doula, and I support queer people through their transitional phases, either it be giving birth or navigating parenting, or getting ready to transition from life into death due to chronic illnesses and lots of other reasons. And in doing that, also realizing again, queer people, we don't, this is not to say that queer people are poor, but to say that we are more under-resourced than most other communities that I know of anyway. And that then meant I took that same sliding scale idea into that work. And I really, really believe in it, and I believe that it's something that works really well as a way of showing solidarity, but also as a way of like allowing people the autonomy of being able to exist and have access to resources and healing spaces that they might want to, but might not necessarily feel financially confident to engage with. So when I saw this Economics of Queerness, I was like, yeah, it's very interesting. And even with Purple Rain Collective, which is a collective that was formed when all the Brexit stuff was announced, we were like, yo, what are we gonna do? Because as queer, black and brown people, we are the ones who are going to be affected the most by all this bigotry. So how are we coming together? How are we thinking about this, and how are we supporting each other? And even in that organizing, there was a very it's mostly the femmes that are doing all this labor, and that really showed itself in the organizing. But then it also, in terms of fundraising, meant that at the moment, as it stands, all we do is we just give money away. We try to fundraise so that we can support queer people around the world. So contextually, those are the things that were coming up for me when I was thinking about this panel on this topic. Yeah.
I think for me, as I was saying to June earlier, it made me think back as well to how we resourced things. I'm sort of torn even today. Certainly in the 80s, politically, I just felt, considering colonisation, wealth being stolen, wealth sitting in museums, etc., as far as I was concerned, and our parents, grandparents, etc., having paid taxes, all sorts of stuff. As far as I was concerned, whatever the GDP is, we should have a massive share of that, and we should be taking it. And we should take every grant, we should be arguing for it. Yeah, that's basically how I view it. And still, don't beg, don't borrow and steal it, sort of thing. And it was something also in the 80s, probably because of the post-70s. I never squatted, although a lot of my mates did, because I lived in bedsits. So for me, that was, and a lot of the squats I went to, it was pretty cool. And I know the Barnsbury lot as well, and they were anarchists and stuff, but some of them were quite middle class, and I wasn't. Right, so all the black and brown people that I knew were working class, worked in industrial units and factories in Willesden, you know, all that sort of stuff. The Grunwick strikers, if you like, that whole history. Those were the women that I knew. So mine was a very different trajectory. So as far as I was concerned, I was going to work all day and all night and earn the money. So I did 3 or 4 jobs, kept on, whether it was cleaning, Victoria Coke Station, finally becoming a race equality officer, and then also doing art. Saving the money to buy a place, and then enabled other people to get deposits. So that was one trajectory. On the other hand, it was also enabling people to get grants, to sit down with people and show how to get grants, not just within the arts, but in social welfare. I think that's, I feel quite passionate about it, actually. I get self-funding, and it's just an argument, although South of Black Sisters isn't the name one can use at the moment because of the trans position, which I'm trying to discuss with some of the new people. You probably know about that, yeah? New management. Anyway, there. But South of Black Sisters used to have this thing about taking money from donors, including very rich, wealthy people. And they said it's all dirty money, and I said it's all dirty money, and I get it, but are you going to turn it away, or are you going to look at... You can't make it clean anyway. So people have constantly worried about this. So when you asked me that question, there wasn't a straightforward answer. I was torn between things. I don't see why people should have to go and do shitty jobs and then self-fund stuff, you know, either. I think that should be part of what our taxes are for, to create a vision for better society.
I'm quite curious about, I guess, how things have changed over time in you doing this work, and what, how the challenges that you've seen for Black and brown queer people, have you seen them changing, and also how the work itself has changed, and also maybe how the identities themselves have changed, and what that brings up for you. Maybe Tobi, you want to start this time, and I'm aware that I guess Tobi, you are most current representative of the panel, but I remember even like coming to a picnic that you organized in like 2018 or 2019, and I would say even in those 5 years, what we may describe as the community has changed a lot, and I think the work surrounding how to support the community has changed a lot, so maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think definitely, like I said earlier, at the time, a lot of the organising I was doing was more around bringing people together and kind of reminding us that we have each other out, like in a not a depoliticized context, but outside of the politics, like our experiences, like the value in just sharing space and sharing community. And so it was a lot of just get together events like Femmes of Colour, Purple Rain Collective, like organising around transport for trans people, like what are the safe spaces, how do we deal with conflict, like that was a lot of the work that was happening then. And then there was like a lot of work also happening in the music scene, where there were a lot of like queer jams or like QT BPOC sessions, and then we had DIY space when it was still going, where a lot of queer events were happening there too. But as the economy continues to deteriorate and becoming more inaccessible to Black and brown queer people, I've seen the ways that labour has led to a lot of burnout actually for a lot of organisers from the times when I was still doing like a lot of active organising. But then it's also like a very tangible lack of space, meaning that we're not able to commune in the same ways that we used to back then. And back then is really not even that long ago. Like it's not even 10 years ago where, so it's really unfortunate to be in these situations where the only ways in which we're able to have spaces for some time is like what y'all were doing in the past of squatting, you know, like, and even then, the laws now are making it harder for you to squat for a prolonged period of time. So the changes that I'm seeing right now and also worrying about when I'm thinking about, you know, generations after us are, where are we supposed to commune? Like, we can't always be outside, and even going out, like, what is the safety for us when transphobia and homophobia and like the attacks are becoming more and more rampant, with the bigotry and the fascism being so apparent in our society. So I feel really frustrated by that, but not in a way that makes me feel hopeless, but in a way that makes me feel like there are lots of strategies around the ways that we have been organizing that need to change and become more tangible, and also conscious of how the economy around us is changing and what that has to mean for our organizing.
When the Gay Liberation Front started, we knew that the issue of money was going to be a very difficult one for us to handle, and we didn't want to get into the situation of becoming dependent on anybody. If you accept grants, in many cases you find that you're in a position where you can no longer criticize the council that's giving you the grant, for example, or the newspaper or magazine that's helping you financially. But we felt that we knew that we were doing something new. We were very, very fired up. We were a group of people who, for the first time in 2,000 years of British history, were standing up and saying, we are lesbian, we are gay, we are trans, and we feel very, very motivated. And we felt that motivation was much more important than money. If you want to do something and you care enough about it, it will get done, right? We all knew we had contacts. For example, when the Gay Liberation Front found that we needed a magazine, we wanted a magazine, because that was one way of communicating to other people. There were many people who couldn't come to Gay Liberation Front meetings. They were outside of London, for example, or they were in the closet and in a position where they couldn't be open. So we thought we need a newspaper, right? We had contacts. Some of us knew, like Graham Chapman from the Monty Python series, right? The Beatles gave us some money after they did the song Come Together, and we named our magazine, our first magazine, Come Together, after the donations that they gave us. And when we spoke to them about it, we said, this is a one-off. It would be great if you were prepared to continue to fund us, but we will run with it. And we will make sure that this is a success. We didn't want to become dependent on anyone. And we, for example, when we set up what was originally called the Gay Switchboard, we knew people at the Houseman's bookstore, and we had volunteers. We had people who were doing work that they would have got thousands for, but they were committed and prepared to do it themselves. Now, the Gay Liberation Front formally only existed for about 5 years. It folded around 1974, 1975, but then it moved into other areas. All the people in it felt so motivated that they went on and started Gay Times magazine, Sappho magazine, and so on and so on. And we found that motivation was better than money and more powerful than money. So we were able to continue being anarchic. And although we slowly became more respectable, for example, the Brixton Fairies who were squatting in Mayo Road actually have now become a cooperative, but they're still a pro-LGBT cooperative. If you want to rent or live in that cooperative, it's better if you're LGBT, right? And you have an advantage rent. But some of the work that had to be done needed good money, and we managed to get some money from the council, but again, without committing ourselves and not obligating ourselves in any way. Now, things have that's one of the ways in which things have changed. When we first started off, because we were so fired up, it was fairly easy to use motivation. But now that it's become, we have things like pink washing. We have things like the people who took over Pride, which was originally self-funded and self-motivating, started to ask for money from Pepsi Cola. They started to approach the management of Kylie Minogue. They started, before you knew it, it became a commercial proposition. Next week, I think it's next week, isn't it? The Pride, all the shops will be open, there'll be rainbows until you want to go mad. All over the place, and most of it is to do with money. And we rejected that, and it was our motivation that made that such a powerful movement, that although it's now very commercial, it's actually having a beneficial effect overall. Because when we were marching in 1972, we had no idea that within 50 years' time, something like 2 million people, many of them straight, will be coming into London to celebrate LGBT lives and pride. And although a lot of it is commercial, it does mean something. It enables many more people to come out. It enables many more people to have self-respect. And so money is more important. Money is less important than motivation. That's one of the things that we learned.
I agree with, both of you in terms of, I suppose what areas are we looking at? Are we looking at bringing class into it? Where do you live? Who are your existing contacts? Who are your existing support networks? It all depends so money does come into it in a way now, especially because the housing associations are like corporations, council housing stock is gone. It's very, very difficult unless you've got kind friends who might have bought a house a long time ago with the pink pound that might put you in. It's really, really hard. So those sort of, because the infrastructure in this country has changed, and the way in which capitalism internationally is changing, I'm really pessimistic about a lot of things. I'm hopeful around the internationalist perspective. I think that's something which is positive about the internet and stuff, because there's the speed in which international contacts can be made and support can be made. But I'm also concerned about how that's also being used by, as we were discussing earlier, about sort of far-right evangelical. When I say right, I don't mean conservative, I mean sort of proto-fascist, very religious, of whatever type. That worries me, and how laws are being changed again, and what we can do about those laws and how they're literally, they're putting people in actual danger in countries. So that worries me, of the tide that's changing again. In terms of the economics and the motivation, I suppose what's changed, who would have thought the sort of films, the sort of books, the sort of events that are taking place, who would have thought that as well, and which changes culture as well. When you see films, say, coming out of India, which may or may not deal with being gay necessarily that well or whatever, but the fact it's even there, and as you said, around music, culturally, but that doesn't, again, help people who have very few resources. So I know what you're talking about in terms of queer, black and brown communities where you live. So where do we get that from? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's why maybe HSBC's gay officers or lesbian gay officers should actually be handing out 10%, so you're not obliged either. So out of wage stuff, that sort of thing. I'm all for that. Yeah. Without obligation, though, as you said. And I don't think it's a problem if you're trying to create resources to take grant money and maybe get somebody else to criticise them.
I just wanted to end on the last question, which is, obviously you've all been doing this work for time, and I just was wondering if all of you could share one big joy that you felt in doing that work. And it can be, I say big, it can be very small, but what's something that you want to shout out that you like, this is something that brought me a lot of joy?
What has brought me joy is when my grandmother, even though she was violent to her kids, came to a play in the 80s that I was part of, a Punjabi play, and I speak Gujarati, was one of the languages, but I had to learn Punjabi, and in a play form. I was torturing enough about two women who fall in love, and it's sort of a play on the story of the Mahabharata, but it twists everything up, it screws with everything. And my grandmother came up and was just, just loved it and said, this is what women should be about, this is whatever, and we need more lesbians or whatever, and that was amazing.
I'm really glad that there are some LGBT people in their 20s and 30s who have no idea that there was a time when, had you come out as a lesbian or a gay person, you'd have been treated as though you were a child murderer. You would have lost your job. Your family would literally have thrown you out the door, right? And that there were people who spent their entire lives into their 50s, 60s, and 70s and never ever came out. Some of them never met anybody to love and to be open with. And that we've overcome that. And it's no small achievement. As I said before, 2,000 years of history in this country, and within 50 years we now have a situation where we can get married, we can have civil partnerships, we're being celebrated next week, it's in all the newspapers. That's no small achievement, and we should pat ourselves on the back for what we have achieved in that time. So it's old joy and new joy for me.
Yeah, I think similarly, I think just having left Nigeria, living in the UK, thinking about how there were points in life where I just thought I'm never going to be able to be somebody who's like safe at home, and now being in a place where I'm seeing pride in Lagos, or like pride in Kenya, and like pride in like countries where, yeah, it's still not legal, but people are persisting and people are finding their space and finding their joy and finding their communities. And also all the trans babies and the queer babies, like just doing their thing and not knowing about, or like, yeah, not having to think about who they are, but in a way that makes them feel shame, but think about who they are in a way that makes them feel proud. I think that's something that brings me real joy, something that brings me lots of motivation to continue doing the work.
Thank you so much. I believe we're out of time. I would like to say a massive thank you to all three of you. That was a beautiful conversation, and I feel really blessed that we're able to host that. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.